Sooner or later, nearly all of us will experience the death of a loved one. Is there any way to be prepared? Unity has created a booklet called Peaceful Passing, with practical and spiritual reminders for the end of life. It shares currently available resources, along with stories from those who have accompanied a loved one to the end. The dying process calls for our spiritual awareness. Get your free copy today at unity.org/booklet.
We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Welcome to Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Hi everyone, welcome to Inspire Nation, a daily show where we help you discover your inner passion, overcome life's greatest challenges, and to shine bright. I'm your host, Michael Sandler. Along with my wife and co-host Jessica Lee, you'll get expert, heartfelt advice from leading authors, athletes, and doctors, along with spiritual masters, peaceful warriors, and beaming beacons of light. Plus, you'll find guided meditations to help you through your day and on your way from some of the top meditation experts and spiritual masters out there. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss a beat. Again, be sure to subscribe to the show. And if you like the show, please be sure to rate it and review it. Thanks so much. This greatly helps others find the show. To check out our schedule and get the latest advice, visit our website at inspirenationshow.com. That's inspirenationshow.com. Get ready to live your greatest life and to shine bright. Woohoo! Hello, bright and shiny beacon of light. If you've been listening to podcast after podcast, show after show, guest after guest, it's easy to become completely overwhelmed by all the tools and advice and have no idea where to start. That's why with all of my clients, we start in the same place each and every time. We start with automatic writing. Even with over 1,000 guests and several thousand books read, it's the number one tool I've found to get guidance and direction, and the only tool I use each and every day. Automatic writing is a process of turning your journaling into channeling and getting information and guidance from the other side of the veil, whether you call it angels, guides, God, or simply your deepest inner wisdom. Automatic writing is perhaps the most cutting-edge tool for connecting with the other side, which is why we've written the definitive guide called the Automatic Writing Experience, or AWE for short. To find out more, simply visit automaticwriting.com, or to get the book, simply visit any local or online bookseller and ask for AWE, the Automatic Writing Experience. It's my favorite way to help you to shine bright. Woohoo! If you've ever wondered about the occult, mysticism, and the secrets of the universe, then do we have the Occult America One Simple Idea show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, award-winning pen historian, New Age researcher extraordinaire, and the best-selling author of two of the coolest books in existence, Occult America and One Simple Idea. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, the secret history of America, the ideas behind it, and what they mean for you. That plus we'll talk about George Washington, Ronald Reagan, Manly Hall, the Freemasons, the Poughkeepsie Seer, a dime machine, and Zolar, and what in the world Frankenstein has to do with anything. So welcome back to the show, Mitch. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, great to be here, Michael.
Fantastic to have you here, Mighty. Woohoo! I love your new backdrop. We're not far off. We're going to talk a lot about geography today and some interesting things that have come out of this area of the country. But before we do that, since we're talking about the occult, is there an Illuminati?
Well, there used to be an Illuminati. There was a group in Bavaria that was founded by a philosopher and lawyer named Adam Weishaupt in 1776. Not a coincidence. He was inspired by some of the same ideals that the best among our founders were inspired by: separation of church and state, protection of the individual from the overreach of religious authorities, the protection of the individual's spiritual search, and he had a strong taste for the occult. He organized the Illuminati as a lodge of renegade Freemasons. His idea was to infiltrate Freemasonic lodges and turn them into vehicles for political revolution. The fact is, although one hears the term Illuminati all the time today, the state of Bavaria passed laws against secret societies And within about 8 or 9 years of the Illuminati's existence, it was more or less wiped out. But the Illuminati kept getting drummed out by pamphleteers and propagandists after political revolutions in France and Russia as a kind of scapegoat for these revolutions, depending on one's point of view. And that's continued to this day. So we hear about the Illuminati, a group that existed really just for about a decade, starting at the dawn of our own country.
Thank you. And it's interesting that you brought up the Freemasons so early, because I was reading a biography, something about my grandfather about a decade ago, actually in Rockaway, New Jersey, not too far from here. And it talked about his involvement with the Freemasons, and I had no idea. So when you talk about secret societies, you mentioned the Freemasons. What are the Freemasons, first off, and how long has there been a history of secret societies in America?
Well, Freemasonry is an organization whose history is to a very great extent steeped in controversy, steeped in secrecy. The organization itself, which has produced some really wonderful first-rate historians, doesn't necessarily have a consensus point of view on its founding. But in a certain sense, that shouldn't surprise us, because I think of Masonry as probably the most radical group that came out of the Reformation, that came out of the occult experimentation of the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, there was a tremendous flowering of occult experimentation in certain nations. But after the death of Queen Elizabeth and after the events of what we call the 30 Years' War, which began in 1618, there was a terrible backlash against occult and esoteric spirituality on the European continent. And a lot of people who were into such things either got very quiet or went underground. They no longer had the same political protections. Enter Freemasonry. I think we begin to see some of the most vivid, clear, plainest references to Freemasonry in diaries, in journals, in letters, starting right around the mid-1600s. And then a couple of generations later, in 1717, the Grand Masonic Lodge of England emerges above ground, and kind of the visible history, I suppose you could say, of Freemasonry begins. But I think what you have in Freemasonry is you have a secretive or clandestine brotherhood. It sounds sort of dramatic to use those terms, but I don't think they're out of the ballpark, that I think was interested in perpetuating some of the radical religious experimentation, esoteric experimentation that flowered for a time during the Renaissance and then got repressed. So there were political necessities to being quiet about one's interests, being private about one's interests. And as we've seen in the example of the Illuminati, which we were just talking about, governments, monarchies, aristocracies, church-state compacts, at will, could pass laws that would wipe out organizations, legally speaking, that were interested in the esoteric. So there was reason for Masonry to be secretive.
It's interesting, though, and thank you for sharing. I've got so many beautiful questions based on this. And don't worry, if you're listening to this, we're going to bring it home to some of their techniques, the Freemasons and occultism, and what occultism mean, and how you can use this to uplift your life. We're not talking dark magic here. We're talking really good, positive stuff. But this history of, you called it radical religious experimentation, isn't it really a rediscovering of what was lost that the ancient Greeks knew, the ancient Egyptians knew, and that maybe even Rome was founded or built upon?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When we look at the mystery traditions, the esoteric religious traditions of the ancient world, to some extent, we're trying to reassemble fragments. As you were alluding, there is this vast religious drama that played out in antiquity, in Egypt, in Persia, in Babylon, in Greece, in Rome, and of course the traditions of the East, which have a profound antiquity of their own. And what we here in the West refer to as the Dark Ages was a centuries-long period of economic and cultural devastation in Europe and in many parts of what we would consider the Western world. Now, it's not as if nothing happened during the Dark Ages. It's not as if history ground to a halt, but Christianity was entirely triumphant by late antiquity. Old mystery religions, nature-based traditions, things that drew upon some of the ideas that were already ancient by the establishment of Rome. These things really were driven underground, and the priesthoods, the orders, the hierarchies, the family trees, the lineage, it was ground to a considerable stop, except for certain folk practices and traditions. So we have no way of knowing how much we've lost in terms of parchments, documentation, altars, temples, much less temple orders themselves. And so when we're trying, and I think Masonry's mission to a very great extent was to try to reassemble some of these fragmentary ancient traditions. And we're still trying to do that today in our 21st century world, having some success. I mean, there are new Hellenic, there are astrological texts from the Hellenic era that are being newly translated today from Latin and Greek. So that's very encouraging. But we're on our knees peeking through a little keyhole. You know, to a very great extent, the traditions of the ancient world have come down to us only in threads.
Hello, bright and shiny beacon of light. If you've been listening to podcast after podcast, show after show, guest after guest, it's easy to become completely overwhelmed by all the tools and advice and have no idea where to start. That's why with all of my clients, we start in the same place each and every time. We start with automatic writing. Even with over 1,000 guests and several thousand books read, it's the number one tool I've found to get guidance and direction, and the only tool I use each and every day. Automatic writing is a process of turning your journaling into channeling and getting information and guidance from the other side of the veil, whether you call it angels, guides, God, or simply your deepest inner wisdom. Automatic writing is perhaps the most cutting-edge tool for connecting with the other side, which is why we've written the definitive guide called the Automatic Writing Experience, or AWE for short. To find out more, simply visit automaticwriting.com, or to get the book, simply visit any local or online bookseller and ask for AWE, the Automatic Writing Experience. It's my favorite way to help you to shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you. I'm going to go to a dollar bill now. In fact, I wish I had one to pull it out. We've got first off some Latin that's very important. We've got an all-seeing eye. What did the founders know and have going on, and what was the reason they put it there?
Right. Well, on July 4th of 1776, the Continental Congress formed a committee to create a new seal, a great seal for the new republic that was being established. And this committee was chaired by one Benjamin Franklin, a Freemason, and they came up with a great seal, the obverse, the front of which is the fairly familiar American eagle with the olive branches and arrows clutched in opposing claws. And the reverse of the Great Seal, to which you're making reference, is that very wonderful, mysterious eye and pyramid surrounded by the Latin maxim, annuit septis novos ordo seclorum, which can be roughly translated as God smiles on our new order of the ages. I have a tattoo of it somewhere. I don't know if we can see it, but it's right there.
Awesome.
And yeah. So that symbol, it's not a leaf directly from Freemasonry, but I think it's inspired by Masonic ideals. And the founders, the best of them, I don't mean to minimize other things that were going on at the time. The Native American culture was being destroyed. Slavery was in full swing. But the best of the founders were profoundly concerned with the protection of the individual spiritual search. And they saw the new nation in their ideals as part of a chain of great civilizations that pursued the search. And they believed, Egypt, Rome, Greece. And they believed that worldly gain, material progress, as represented by the incomplete pyramid, was unfinished without the eye of providence, or the higher, or the all-seeing eye, a very direct reference to religious ideals of ancient Egypt. So hence we get the eye and the pyramid indicating that our material progress is incomplete without inner vision.
Thank you. How many of our founding fathers were members of, we'll call them secret societies, were Freemasons, were otherwise. Going back to the founding of this country, but I also look at, we talk about ley lines, energy lines, Washington, D.C., how things are laid out. If you take a close look, it's actually Ooga Booga land. And particularly if you go into like the hallowed halls of Congress or underneath Congress, you realize, wait a second. This was built by either the craziest architect/engineer on the planet, or somebody was up to something.
Well, it's interesting. I remember years ago, I visited the Library of Congress with the philosopher Jacob Needleman, and we're walking around there. Everywhere we turn, there's pagan statuary, astrological symbolism, pentagrams, a catalog of occult symbols. And I said to him, I feel like I'm walking through a temple of the occult. And he said, yeah, I feel exactly the same way. And there are other major structures in America, some more recent, like Grand Central Terminal here in New York City, where you'll see the same thing. These influences were so pronounced among the founders, many of whom, as you're referencing, were Freemasons. I wouldn't say a majority, but among the founders who were Masons, you have George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, I mentioned earlier, John Hancock, Paul Revere. An outsized number of Washington's generals were Freemasons, an outsized number of the framers of the Constitution, signers of the Declaration. It's no joke. I mean, you had huge representation of Freemasonry among the founders. And the fact is, it's all the more remarkable if one considers how rural a society America was at that time. Around 1776, I mean, Philadelphia maybe at that point was, I don't know, maybe 1,000, houses, probably 500, earlier in the century. And you're talking about places where there were no hospitals, there were no universities, there were no cathedrals. You had farm, family, church, maybe a public house here and there, a grange here and there, not much else. So if you joined Freemasonry, that was a tremendously formative affiliation. There weren't guilds and societies and universities and other things to which people had affiliation. There were very, very few ties that bound. And for Freemasonry to become an oath for you, for Freemasonry to become a dedication for you, that became a major part of your identity. It meant something.
And if I understand correctly, because I'm not a Freemason myself, you're sworn to a sacred oath. You can't share about that. So there might be a secret handshake code that you can say amongst other Freemasons, but you can't go discussing it with anyone else.
That's right. I'm not a Freemason either. I see myself as a friend of Freemasonry. I participate in a lot of educational events with Masonry. I'm not a Freemason, and I respect the privacy. There's a difference between secrecy and privacy. Secrecy always sounds nefarious, but we have to remember, and in this world of informational explosion, people are entitled to privacy, including individuals who are on a search.
Thank you. So let's go from there. Let's fast forward a little bit in time. So I'm back in New Jersey where 6 years ago, Jessica and I landed. We'd come off of Maui. It's a whole long story. And I ended up being called. First, I dove into my automatic writing. And then I got called to write my book, Awe, the Automatic Writing Experience. And there was this, to say I felt called, running around, stomping around in the Hudson River Valley to write the esoteric, to write about the technology between this side of the veil and the other side of the veil is a vast understatement. And it turns out that there is a history of that here. And I'm very curious about that because to me, I look at resonant frequencies and I look at if you go into a cemetery, there's a resonant frequency there, not to mention who and what you might bump into. If you go into a very positive place where there have been incredible weddings, for instance, for hundreds of years, is a frequency. So I'm curious, what's what Poughkeepsie area has to do with anything here? What's this frequency here? There was the Poughkeepsie Seer. There is I think they called it the Burned Out Highway. I might get that term wrong, going on north of here. What's going on, Mitch?
Well, it was interesting. As I was writing my first book, Occult America, I found again and again and again that all these new radical religious movements, occult retentions from the old world, heretical religious movements were bubbling up especially in the early 1800s, right after the War of Independence, in central New York State, an area that was referred to as the burned over district for being burned over by the fires of the spirit. And there was a carriage path that passed through central New York State, which today for us is US Route 20. It's the longest continuous road in the US. And that was, as one historian beautifully put it, a psychic highway. That was where all these new ideas spread out across America. So you had the Quakers and the Mormons and the Seventh-day Adventists and spiritualism, or the movement dedicated to talking to the dead, mesmerism. All kinds of different ideas were bubbling up in the burned over district. And there were all kinds of reasons for this. The area had a very, very rich folklore that supported some of these ideas. The area was also home to the Iroquois Nation, which was, after the War of Independence, pushed out of central New York State by the new colonial government, and central New York was open to land settlement, land speculation. So you had a wave of relatively liberal New Englanders flowing into central New York State, and they left behind the ties and the congregations and the churches of their youth, or of their families, or of whatever the family circles were that they came from. They were a ripe new audience for fresh ideas, for new ideas. They were new congregants. And so whenever you see migration flows in America, that's where the new religious movements start popping up. It's exactly what happened in California. California became a huge magnet for migrants in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and California became the driving engine of the New Age, which it remains today. But it started, hard as it is to believe, in the Hudson Valley in central New York State.
Well, it's fascinating to me. I can't believe I'm going to go back there. But okay, so I've got one of my degrees is a political science degree, and constitutional law, international affairs, all that good stuff. And I look back at my time in school, and I go, why didn't anybody talk about the founding fathers had slaves? Why isn't anybody going, holy crap? How do we balance that? Because we can't rewrite history, but we look back at people and say they had all these amazing ideas. They're protecting these ideas. I think of, when you think of protecting, I go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and these group of protectors that's on like a powerboat chasing down Indiana Jones, trying to knock him off of his powerboat so that he doesn't find these ancient ideas. How do we balance the positive power and goodness that can be used but people had slaves?
We have to pan the camera back, and we have to enlarge the picture, and we have to teach with perspective. I don't know why that's so difficult for so many of us in our culture today. It's not a question of saying, okay, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, so therefore we're no longer going to talk about Thomas Jefferson as a visionary political theorist. Well, we have to, because he created the Articles of Religious Freedom in Virginia that basically became our own First Amendment. So the work that you and I do today stands on the foundation of that. At the same time, he also participated in a profoundly inhumane system that destroyed countless lives, that eradicated countless lives over the course of centuries. Aren't we capable of understanding that spectrum? Aren't we big enough to understand that spectrum? I'm not interested in heroizing someone to the point of blotting out catastrophe, nor am I interested in blotting out what was visionary about someone. Life is fractious, it's complicated, it's conflictual. Teach the whole thing.
Thank you. On that note, I want to talk about a few of our more recent historical figures who've been very involved in New Thought. And let's go to movie star Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yes, right. And he had an after career, as I remember. Reagan was in many regards the first U.S. president who was a product of the positive thinking culture. When he first ran for the presidency, he used a line, we live in a nation where nothing is impossible and that the individual can expand beyond anything he was told were his limits. Again, a beautiful ideal coupled with what for some was a profoundly soiled and compromised reality, So welcome to politics, welcome to human nature, from which none of us are free. But you had within Reagan the culture of an aspirational metaphysics combined with what for many was a political retrenchment and a retreat from some of the ideals of the 60s existent in one person. That is the story of the encounter between metaphysical and political ideals in America. There's a story of great valor and promise and ideals, and there's also a story of a reality that sometimes can be deeply conflictual and for some people very soiled by compromise. But that's part of the story of who we are.
Thank you. I want to go from there. I want to go to Hermeticism. And I was out on a walk with Jessica earlier this week. And I think I mentioned before, we left Colorado and we left the West Coast due to a lot of fires last year, fires coming up that we felt were coming. We left right before them this year, and we wanted to get out of the smoke. And this is kind of the Grim Reaper story of somebody leaves town thinking the Grim Reaper has come to get him, only to bump into the Grim Reaper on the road. We leave the West only to find the smoke here in the East. And Jessica is going, we've got to do something. It's not enough to just be speaking about this. We need to do something. And I go back to Hermeticism, as above, so below. Can you dive into Hermeticism, maybe having nothing to do with climate change, but what do those profound words mean, and what do they mean for our lives?
Sure. Hermeticism is a philosophy that grew out of the encounter between Greek and Egyptian culture in late antiquity. In the final stages of the Egyptian empire, in the generations immediately following the death of Christ, the ruling class of Egypt was Greek. And that ruling class, or its scribes, began to write down the ideas of Egyptian esoteric philosophy in Greek in these manuscripts that were later called the Hermetic manuscripts. The Greeks associated Hermes, or Mercury, their god of intellect and writing, with the ancient Egyptian god of intellect and writing, Thoth.
I'm Michael Sandler. You're listening to Inspire Nation, and we'll be back with more from Mitch Horowitz on Occult America and One Simple Idea.
Discover the power within. Unity Online Radio. The voice of an awakening world.
Welcome back to Inspire Nation. Today's inspiring talk is with Mitch Horowitz on Occult America and One Simple Idea.
And whom they referred to as Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice greatest Hermes. They venerated Thoth as 3 times as great as their own Hermes or Mercury. So very often these manuscripts that were records of ancient Egyptian philosophy were signed by Hermes, or Hermes Trismegistus. So we call them Hermetic in nature. The central idea that you'll find in Hermetic philosophy is that all of reality emanates from one great higher mind, or nous, as the Greeks referred to it, and that reality expands in concentric circles, and we, you and I and everyone listening, are kind of figments or figures or projections from the mind of this great infinite intellect, or nous. And as such, we too can use our minds as causative forces within the particular concentric circle in which we find ourselves. So as above, so below, as you were saying. That's one of the great dictums from Hermetic philosophy. Everything is interconnected. Everything is part of a ripple effect. Everything is part of a kind of a sliding scale. And that was one of the core ideas of Hermeticism.
It gets into the whole area of precognition. And what you're talking about is there's presentience of recognizing that this feeling is actually a seed for a greater feeling that may be on its way, which is kind of wild.
Absolutely could be. In my work, I don't use the term manifestation. I use the term selection because, and we'll do another show strictly on quantum physics, but I think that if one accepts, and I'm saying this in super shorthand, but if one accepts that linear time is an illusion, and we know that linear time is illusion. We know that the effects of time change based on speed, for example. We know based on 90 years at this point of experiments in quantum mechanics that ultra small particles are occupying multiple places at once not only allowing for, but necessitating the existence of infinite parallel outcomes and possibilities. So if we accept the fact, which I think is basically settled, that linear time is an illusion, a necessary illusion that we use to organize our lives, but that it's really not there, it raises the suggestion of whether precognition is just an expanded perspective, an expanded point of view, and whether what we call manifestation is selection through the measurement of the senses. What are the senses really but tools of measurement? Touch, taste, sight, smell. We use these things to measure them. They measure things. They are organic technologies, so to speak. So if we're able to enter into a visualizing and feeling state that adopts a certain perspective, that in itself, at exquisitely sensitive moments, may be an act of selection of what's actually going on.
Manly Hall. I don't know why I want to bring up Manly Hall, but why do I want to bring up Manly Hall right now?
Well, Manly P. Hall was a friend to and an inspiration on Ronald Reagan, who you referenced earlier. I have a whole chapter in One Simple Idea and elsewhere about their relationship. I discovered maybe about 11 years ago, lines straight out of Manly P. Hall were showing up in Ronald Reagan's speeches as early as the 1950s. And so I sort of did the forensics, and I found that sure enough, Reagan was using some of Manly P. Hall's exact phraseology, especially from his book, The Secret Destiny of America, which came out in 1944.
How do his teachings affect, overlap, or direct One Simple Idea?
Well, one of the notions that Hall promulgated in his work, and this was something that Ronald Reagan particularly picked up upon, was that the flowering of America as a republic, and someone knows it's 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and we'll meet Ruru right after 3 o'clock as well.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes to 3, so I'll be brief with this because we have to do our vigil. But the flowering of America as a nation and the presence of Freemasonry as a particular influence at the dawn of the country, Manly saw as evidence that the United States was, at its best, a product of ancient religious ideals that sought to find a vessel or a nation that would protect the individual's search for meaning. And that was one of Hall's core beliefs, and that was a belief that Ronald Reagan picked up upon when he began his political career.
Thank you. So what we're going to do now, we're going to dive into this meditation. Then I'm going to ask you about One Simple Idea and how it's affecting your life today, because I know it keeps changing. I'm going to grab the Rooster Ruru to join us for this meditation. There we go.
You're a brave man. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
And it's 3 o'clock sharp.
Perfect. Let's do this.
All right. Well, every day at 3 p.m. Eastern, as some of your listeners know, I pause for a few moments of silent prayer, silent vigil, for the wishes of everyone who cares to participate. I just take a few moments each day, 3 p.m. Eastern, every day, 7 days a week. Unless there's a medical emergency, I'm doing it, and anybody can join. And this is the Miracle Club. And we just spend a few moments holding a wish or a prayer or a vigil for the honorable desires, wishes, aspirations of everyone participating. And if people wish to send me a prayer request or just ask that they be remembered, maybe they have a particular need, maybe finding employment, maybe finding a home, maybe healing a rupture in a relationship, whatever it may be, people can always reach out to me, and they will be remembered at this 3 p.m. hour. And I just always want people to know that wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing, whatever activities you're engaged in, at 3 o'clock Eastern, you can always pause, and I will be with you doing this every day. And that's the Miracle Club. I'll let it be there. I purposely keep these periods very brief because I realize people have kids, people have jobs, people are in traffic, people are in elevators, whatever it is. And so I purposefully keep it to just a brief time. And I want everybody to be able to do it whenever they feel like. If you want to do it every day, do it every day. If you want to do it once a year, do it once a year. Whatever you like.
I think of Dean Radin, Center for Noetic Sciences. I think of his research. I think of research by Howard Martin and their team at HeartMath. I think of global coherence. What do you see as the benefit of everybody coming together with the same, I'm going to say, cause or pause at the same time?
Well, I do believe that if all of reality is based in one great higher mind or intellect, in nous or infinite intelligence, or what Emanuel Swedenborg called the divine influx, or Emerson called the oversoul, or what have you, then I do believe that if one follows the Hermetic dictum of reciprocity, of connection, of a sliding scale, then in a sense, a group of people or even one individual centered at a certain time, point, in place, in a moment, is to a degree infinite intelligence localized. And that's the point of the Miracle Club, that a group of us coming together represent infinite intelligence localized for that moment, that fragment in time. And let's see what happens.
My belief, first off, I'm an energy guy, and I call myself an alchemist. I believe it's all energy, it's all what we play with, it's all what we do with it. And I do say go to the feeling state, but you're right. We can't always get to the feeling state. And sometimes even trying will boomerang us back, because then we feel bad about ourselves and we go even farther from the feeling state. So going along your hypothesis, maybe the answer is in the question. You said focused energy, I believe. Maybe it is focusing. I have this focus toward this desired outcome. And even though I can't feel it, if I bring all of my energy to bear on that focus, because it's all about energy. We have admittedly, and I don't want people in the New Thought movement to kick themselves, we have created the very thing oftentimes that we do not want because of our focused energy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure. And that includes orthodoxy. That includes orthodoxy. We have a metaphysical culture today. We have a New Age culture that, and it's just human nature. It's just human nature tries to sort of draw a grid and says, this is how it works. You get into the feeling state, or you pray believing that you have already received, which has an antecedent in Western scripture. And all of these ideas are valuable ideas, but I just don't want us to consider them to be settled territory. I want to push further, because I know that when I'm struggling with anxiety or I'm struggling with a profound disappointment, I cannot just enter that feeling state of the wish fulfilled. I am going through something that has to be sustained, that has to be passed through. Am I to assume then that New Thought theology doesn't hold something for me? Am I to assume that Mother Nature has played this kind of, has placed this kind of wall in front of us? Yeah, where we can't access the formative energies of the mind when we're in a state of extreme grief, when we're in a state of depression, when we're in a state of anxiety, we're in a state of anger, when we're driven to our knees by the circumstances of the world, unless we do this. I don't know that to be true. I don't know that Mother Nature has played a cruel joke on us. And my question is, how can people access causative energies when they are in a state of extreme emotional duress and they're not able to exit that state, which is also the truth of the human condition?
Thank you. On that note, then, is there one simple fallback tool as you're challenging everything? I mean, everything's falling apart. I'm not saying, I want to say it's falling together at a higher level. You've got concentric circles around you. I truly believe we're the electron shaking at a level like the rocket ship about to take off, and it feels like parts of the electron are about to fall off of us, which I guess they are, to elevate to that higher state, whatever that means. And I don't pretend to have a clue what that means. But is there one tool or fallback that you're going to now at this period of time as we're falling together at a higher level?
Absolutely. And I would say a radically self-conceived concept of prayer. prayer, but not prayer according to anything necessarily that has been laid down in canonized literature, unless that resonates with you, in which case go for it. But I believe that our ancient ancestors, and we're now going back to the Hermetic era and beyond, I believe that our ancient ancestors had a very, very profound and deep understanding of nature. Death itself was a much more palpable presence to them than it is many times to most of us. And I believe that they were capable of identifying energies within nature, and they very often personified these energies with names like Minerva or Jupiter or Set or Hermes, and they sought petitionary relationships with these energies. They personified these energies as deity and sought relationships with these energies. I am not prepared to say that the theological approach of our ancient ancestors was wrong. This practice that I'm describing spread throughout the globe in all times, in all places, from Siberia to Polynesia. You know, everything I'm describing was at the heart of ancient spiritual practice, separated by vast stretches of time, geography, culture, language. I want to tread very, very carefully before coming to any conclusion about that not being relevant to the 21st century man and woman. So my challenge, my suggestion, my wish for people watching, if you're feeling a state of acute need, ask yourself, is there a deified energy? Is there a figure from the canon of deities, or maybe some other kind of figure that deeply resonates with you personally? And might you, at a quiet, deeply private moment, venture to seek some kind of relationship with that personified or deified energy? So it's prayer, but without any guardrails, without any dictates, without any roadmap necessarily, unless one appeals to you. I would try that. I would experiment with that, and I'd be very free with it.
All right. With that said, where can people go to find out more and find out about your modern occultism class coming up?
Oh, well, I'm online at mitchhorowitz.com. Starting August 4th, I'm teaching a live course online for 12 weeks called Modern Occultism, which delves into the history, the people, the ideas, the practices of what we call the occult and how it came to shape. So it's both historical and practical. That's being sponsored by the Theosophical Society. People can learn about that at theosophical.org, or they can go to my website or social media. It's easy to find, and we'll be starting August 4th.
And that's mitchhorowitz.com if people didn't catch that as well.
mitchhorowitz.com. Yeah.
Couple last questions, Mitch. This has been phenomenal. First off, are you, because last time we spoke, I think we were diving into, I can't believe it's been a year already. We were diving into all things COVID. Are you, that's a strange way to put it. Are you hopeful for the future?
Wow, that is a heavy question, Michael. Am I hopeful for the future? I would never want to give you a pat or a canned answer, to everything. Yeah, I do believe that it's a scary time because we are taking a sledgehammer to a lot of institutions and guardrails and familiar structures that we knew. People are suffering financially in some cases, but people are also financially finding the wherewithal not to return to old jobs that may have been very depleting, that may have left them feeling very unhappy. We are witnessing right now in our generation the mainstreaming of the UFO thesis, which I think is very important because that starts getting people, it's not directly related to what you and I have been talking about, but there is a relation because it starts getting people thinking about interdimensionality and things like that. Every third day I'm reading articles in the New York Times. Should we be attempting to contact aliens? This was unthinkable when I was a kid.
We had documentary filmmaker Carolyn Corey on the topic last week. We have Stephen Greer on Monday or Tuesday of this week. Because you and I, we stepped back our aperture quite widely and we said, okay, we can see it coming. How much are they going to meter out here? How much are they going to meter out here? What's going to be the collective story? And so it's a fascinating time, isn't it?
It's a fascinating time. Psychedelics as a therapeutic treatment are starting to go mainstream. I believe we're going to see a resumption of funding of ESP research on college campuses and in scholarly settings, something that's personally very, very important to me. And I think that all these factors are converging to give us a new sense of human nature that's as radically upending, that may prove as radically upending in our age as Darwinism did in the Victorian age. So I don't know whether I would translate that precisely to being hopeful, but I am being very, very watchful. Things are on the move. Things are on the move, and I advise everyone to watch very, very carefully.
So it begets a question. So I guess there's going to be two last questions, even though I said it was two last questions. Please forgive me, Mitch.
It's fine, man. No, I dig it.
How important is it for us to pay attention to our thoughts and where we place our awareness at this time?
It's critically and vitally important. And the plea that I would make to everybody, and your listeners have heard me say this before, is that we have got to start to clean up the pollution of sarcasm and rhetorical questions and humiliating other people that abounds online. Online culture is our culture. We still exist in this three-dimensional world, but we spend the vast majority of our work lives, our social lives, our entertainment lives plugged in. That's how it is. So I didn't even know there's a distinction between online culture and whatever else exists in the world. And online culture is dominated by humiliation, sarcasm, rhetorical questions, pile-on attitudes. We have got to unplug from that. I don't mean unplug in terms of leaving social media. I'm on social media all the time. But don't participate in those anger-driven threads. Don't participate in them, because we will not make it as a civilization if we give ourselves over constantly, every hour, every day, to sarcasm and humiliation. It's incredibly demeaning to the individual. Stay out of it for 1 hour and watch yourself stand taller. Try it.
Oh, there's a Google Xer. I can't believe his name has escaped me. We've had him on the show almost a half a dozen times. Brilliant gentleman who's talked about the dangers of AI being our child, and AI reading everything that we write online, and that's what it's learning from.
Right. That's a brilliant observation. And how could that be avoidable? It's going to happen. Every parent knows you teach by example. You may like it, you may dislike it, but I think everyone accepts that as a fact. I've witnessed it in the lives of my own children. How could that not be true? And that ought to give us tremendous pause.
Absolutely. Mo Gaudat, his name popped in the head, Mo Gaudat. So on that note, any last words of I don't know if you're going to even enjoy this word, wisdom that you want to share with us today, Mitch?
I do believe that we have much greater power than we were raised to believe. I do believe that we've seen too much to conclude anything but the fact that our thoughts are causative, our thoughts have causative properties, and there may be many, many different conditions and circumstances which alter our experience of that, which alter that as an observable law, but it is there. And I do believe that there is a pendulous quality of reciprocity in our lives. Another way of talking about as above, so below. Everything is interconnected. So take seriously the power that you have as an individual, both in the positive and the negative. And we have an obligation, and I think our civilization stands on it, and our relationships stand on it, not to participate in the gossip, the sarcasm, the hate, the humiliation that so dominates online life. And if we are participating in it, we have to honor the fact that that's having an impact on our experience right now and on the experience of other people. We can't have one without the other. We can't just have the law of attraction or selection, as I put it, as being this wonderful potential if we're not also paying attention to it in its negative expression. So pay attention to it in its negative expression, pay attention to it in its positive expression. Take seriously yourself as a being that's connected to history, connected to the cosmos, connected to other beings, as above, so below. Understand your power. Understand that there are also circumstances that may seem to obscure our power and navigate that with an immense self-respect and an immense dignity, realizing that every philosophy only comes down to conduct, and what is my conduct this day?
Woohoo! Am I gonna choose love? Am I gonna choose fear? Mitch, as always, knocked it out of the park. Grand slam.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It is phenomenal having you on. It is clear you have grown to a new concentric circle over the last year as well. So these challenges.
It's been a year.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's been one heck of a year.
Wild. Absolutely. Well, I love the Inspire Nation family. Wonderful to be on, and I enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Occult America and one simple idea, and begin discovering your greatest power today and shine bright. Woohoo! I hope you love this show just as much as Ruru did. And it's the perfect segue. We're going to be teaching a class over the next month on the Kybalion, on Hermeticism, on as above, so below, and how you can incorporate that into your life. So you're going to find a link for that below. Ruru is getting very excited about it. And of course, you can check out our #1 Angels and Spirit Guides book on Amazon. The automatic writing experience, and our live class that we have once a month with 50 videos to guide you through step by step, just like Ruru is saying, to help you be able to connect as above, so below, to be able to connect on the other side of the veil at a moment's notice. You can find out about that, of course, at the link below at automaticwriting.com. Would love to have you as a part of my class. That class, also love to have you as a part of the class on Hermeticism. And every Sunday night, we have a live event with me here on YouTube. Really fun. Whole bunch of people get together. We do a group meditation together where it radically changes your frequency. Just like what Mitch was talking about with his 3 p.m. event. We do this every Sunday night. To sign up for that or to join us for that, simply click the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon to be notified of that upcoming live event and of all of our live events, shows, and premieres. On that note, love you guys so much. Here's the link to check out the next amazing show. Be sure to give this a thumbs up. Leave your comments below. Love you guys so much. Shine bright. Woohoo! You got a crow for me, Roo? If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, like it, rate it, and review it, which helps more people find the show. Again, please be sure to subscribe and rate it and review it. Thanks so much. And be sure to sign up for our mailing list at InspireNationShow.com, where you'll find even more great interviews and information you won't find anywhere else. That's InspireNationShow.com. And if you love the show, please support us by making a donation by signing up for our Backstage Pass. You'll get additional interviews, content, meditations, and more you can't get anywhere else. And best of all, you'll help keep the show going strong. To make a donation and sign up for your Backstage Pass, simply visit InspireNationShow.com and click the Backstage Pass link. Again, that's InspireNationShow.com and click the Backstage Pass link. Thank you so much. We send you all our love. Shine bright. Woohoo!
Thanks for listening. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Sooner or later, nearly all of us will experience the death of a loved one. Is there any way to be prepared? Unity has created a booklet called Peaceful Passing, with practical and spiritual reminders for the end of life. It shares currently available resources, along with stories from those who have accompanied a loved one to the end. The dying process calls for our spiritual awareness. Get your free copy today at unity.org/booklet.